Hello, beautiful people. My name is Emma.
And I'm MC.
And we are your hosts of the G-Forces podcast. So this past weekend was the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. It was the fourth year that they had it there?
The first year they had it was 2021.
Yeah,
so.
And they actually proposed a new track for, I think, 2027 that looks absolutely wild.
Yeah, the elevation levels on this new track are unprecedented.
Yeah, it actually looks like Mario Kart.
Yeah, there's a lot of buzz around it. I really, honestly, I don't think I've seen anything negative.
Yeah, everyone's excited.
I think everyone's really excited, so.
Which is interesting because, hot take, it's another Hollywoodification of F1, and I think people typically hate that stuff, so it's interesting that they're liking it there.
Well, I think the other interesting aspect of it, too, is the fact that there was so much issue with Vegas and the glitz and glamour and the show, and, you know, the comparison has been Rainbow Road Mario Kart for this, so,
definitely interesting.
I don't know, maybe, I don't know. I'm curious to see if they'll keep the street circuit, like, that's the other question for me is...
It's not even really a street circuit.
Too. But are they gonna get rid of Jeddah? Like, what happens...
I have no idea.
Like, again, it's my issue with Vegas. It's my issue with the possibility of whatever, Chicago, these other places that they've mentioned. There are so many other courses around the world that are already built, that have history, that do the updates, maintain them, bring that culture to a country that we haven't seen in years. That's my issue with it.
I agree.
And, you know, maybe traveling is easier if we keep them in, like, regional pockets of the world, you know?
Well, I do think that they, kind of a sidetrack, but still on topic with this, the contracts that they have with some races where, like, Abu Dhabi has to be the last race of the season.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if they want to work on the sustainability and, like, just trying to go net zero, they need to not have contracts based on when it's going to be the first or last race of the season. They just need to have, like, okay, let's do all the Middle Eastern tracks.
Like, this is this leg
2
of,
months.
this is the
next
Asian leg, this is the North American, like,
It would make more sense to do that because then you're not flying around as much, and then also the sleep schedules for the drivers and the entire team.
Well, they're not jumping crazy time zones.
Yeah.
So, anyways,
We also got to see F1 Academy race this weekend, which was awesome.
It was the F1 Academy this season debut. There was 2 races.
Yep.
Really cool to finally see them on the track. Huge amounts of support. We're filming this on Sunday, so hopefully a lot of you guys paid attention to all of the International Women's Day.
Yeah.
Kind of hullabaloo going around about it. You know, like, there was so much good happening on Friday for F1 Academy, F1 involvement. It was really, really nice.
Yeah, 100%.
And honestly, watching the F1 Academy races, I was like giggly the whole time. Like, there was
I was so excited to watch it.
And there was so much support. Like, it was so nice to see, you know. We haven't talked about it yet, but Williams is doing, Logan Sargent and Alex Albon are doing, like, a podcast webisode.
Yeah.
And they're doing an episode per Grand Prix weekend. And, you know, they had Williams-sponsored F1 Academy driver Leah Block. You saw Lewis Hamilton really down by the F1 Academy paddock. George Russell, Logan Sargent, Zach Brown. There was so much community, it felt like, and excitement.
Yeah.
So, yeah, really, really special to watch as it happened.
Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah, a lot happened this weekend. Some teams, it was really good. Some people, it was really, really special. But
some people couldn't even race.
Some people couldn't even race. A lot happened this weekend, so should we talk about the track and where we are?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Cool. Alrighty, guys, so this is race 2 of the 2024 season, and this is the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. The official race name is the Formula 1 STC Saudi Arabian Grand Prix 2024. Like I said earlier, the first F1 Grand Prix held at this racetrack was in 2021. The circuit length is 6.174 kilometers or 3.83 miles. They're doing 50 laps in total, so that race distance is coming out to 308.45 kilometers or about 191.6 miles. The lap record for this circuit was placed the first year of this race, 2021, by Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes, and his lap record was 130.73. That lap record is still maintained after the weekend. I think the closest to get there...
It's like a second off.
Yeah, Max was about a second off. There were faster times in... Quali, and I'm not sure if there were faster times in practice. I don't have the fast laps for those, whatever. But yeah, it was interesting to see that we didn't get super close to breaking that record.
Yeah.
There are 27 turns at the Jeddah Corniche circuit. This is the most turns in the season on a racetrack.
I will say, it doesn't look like...
It's more waves.
Yeah, it's almost like
curves.
Yeah.
Like soft curves.
But
and then
the way that the curves are, they're so, like, severe in so many of them and almost blind in some ways that, like, if you aren't on the right line, you can very easily just, like, kiss the wall and then are, like, thrown around, basically.
Yeah.
That was, like, the easiest way that people were essentially crashing.
Yeah, it's a very, very narrow circuit, like most street circuits are. And there are two major turns kind of at the end of the wavy straights. I don't even want to call them straights, like the wavy, I don't know. It's a weird shape. Like, Google it if you haven't seen the map. But yeah, it's definitely interesting. So yeah. There are 3 DRS zones at Jeddah. DRS detection zone 1 starts between turn 17 and 18, and then activation begins after turn 19. Detection zone 2 starts right before turn 22, and activation begins between 24 and 25. And then detection zone 3 starts right after turn 27, and activation begins farther up on that start-finish straight. So yeah, this circuit is in the coastal town Jeddah. The circuit is right on the Red Sea, so that was really cool. The actual Grand Prix was at night, so obviously you're not going to see the ocean, but you could
still see it a bit.
You'd see, not ocean. But yeah, you could. It was really cool to kind of see like that disparity. And then this is the first street track of the season. Obviously, Bahrain isn't a street track, and it's deemed the fastest street circuit of the season, and it's only second to Monza in terms of speed for the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the biggest argument is it a street circuit? Because I don't know. I guess it was a street before this, and now they've turned it into a park. So, it was a big argument. Not a big argument, but
a discussion.
A discussion throughout the weekend, is it really a street circuit? So, yeah, very, very, very fast.
Yeah.
So that is the Jeddah Corniche circuit and the facts about the Saudi Grand Prix.
Okay, we'll get into free practice now.
Yeah.
So for free practice 1, there wasn't a ton going on. I feel like the main things was that there was a lot of debris just like flying around the track. There was like plastic bags. It was the first time that this was when we saw Charles compare it to Mario Kart, right?
Yeah, he was like, in his Monegasque accent, he was like, it feels like it's Mario Kart. What is with all of these plastic bags on the track? And the biggest issue, too, is, if the way the cars are built, that plastic bag can actually do a lot of damage if it gets sucked into the car. So you were seeing the mechanics remove the plastic bags. But yeah, it was like, where the hell were they coming from?
I have no idea. But I mean, at least it's not like with Singapore where you have the giant lizards, and then in Canada you have the groundhogs. running around the tracks, basically.
Yeah. Was it Mexico that birds were the issue last year? One of them.
Oh, yeah. Didn't Max get a bird in his car?
I thought Checo or someone.
Someone killed a bird, I think, accidentally.
I don't know. But, yeah. I feel like it's the first of the season. I mean, obviously it's only the second race, but last weekend, we didn't really have issues with debris. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
And then also Lance Stroll clipped the side of the track, and then he had to go in and they had to take a look at his car. I think some of the steering might have been off. Because then he couldn't turn. I remember him saying he couldn't turn right or he couldn't turn left. I couldn't remember one of them. So I think basically the front axle was thrown off.
Yeah, I think they just had to go in and recalibrate it. It wasn't overly. It wasn't an overt amount of damage.
Yeah. And then, what was it? Free practice 2, there was another loose drain cover, in Vegas.
And last weekend.
Yeah, but in Vegas, it was such a big deal. Everyone was like...
Well, I think that's the irony, is that Vegas was, the biggest...
Everyone hated on Vegas.
Everyone just, was like, what is it with these drain covers? And now it's the second weekend in a row.
Yeah.
We're 2 for 2
and it's
on
not
drain
like these
covers.
races haven't occurred at these places before.
Yeah, apparently it was a drain cover, I think, in front of the Haas garage, and they were concerned about it. It was, loose. And so I think they went and cemented them shut. But
yeah. She had to, weld it shut, I think.
Yeah. I just think it's funny that it was this huge argumentative point for Vegas, and now it's happened. I
think the reason why
twice.
It's such a huge argumentative point in Vegas
is so dangerous.
The way that it went through Carlos's car, that if it had gone a millimeter to the left or right or something, it would have hit his legs.
But I think as spectators, there were a lot of people who were like, "This is that's ridiculous." It's
or people being this has never happened before.
And
no, now this has happened for the first 2 races of the season.
So, 10-minute delay on that front.
And then we wake up Friday morning to the news that Carlos Sainz will not be participating for the rest of the race weekend. Carlos, on media day and during FP1 and FP2, he had talked about how he was not feeling well. And I guess Friday morning for us, in the middle of the night, I'm guessing he was at the doctor's and they found out he had appendicitis and they had to remove his appendix. Which I feel like the fact that 2 F1 drivers in the last now 2 years have gotten appendicitis and had to get their appendix removed, I feel like they need to have a whole meeting with F1 drivers, go over the symptoms. You know how a lot of other sports, there are specific problems that just occur because of that sport. Mm-hmm. I wonder if there's something going on that quite literally causes these drivers to have appendicitis.
Well, I'm curious. I mean, I don't.
Because I know it's a common thing, but 2 in 2 years, that's a lot out of the 20 guys.
Well, it's one of those things that if it bursts, you're done.
You can get really sick.
You die.
Yeah.
And I think it's just
maybe they just remove all of their appendix at this rate.
Well, I think too it kind of goes to show the stress that they're under, that who knows, there probably are moments where they are all fighting off colds and fighting off feeling sick. Yeah. And it's the beginning of the season, so probably it's that fact of you just got to get back into it, find your rhythm. But hey, it happened to our cousin Kevin at the beach house, and we have a whole bunch of aunts that are nurses, and we didn't believe him for 2 days.
Oh my God, I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, so I'm not surprised. I feel like appendicitis is just one of those things that
you don't think about.
It's a mad rush, and yeah, I mean it happens to anyone. So
yeah. I am interested to see what the after effects of this appendix is going to be, because last time when Alex Albon had his appendix removed, it caused a spiral effect of all of this drama and is essentially the reason now why Daniel Ricciardo is driving for Racing Bulls.
I mean, I hope that to kind of pivot away from the conspiracies and the is this the curse of the appendix? I think that while, yes, there was a whole shitstorm of crap that followed after Alex Albon's, I really think that, maybe Carlos Sainz's appendix was a good thing. Because we got to see a driver debut, and we got to see younger talent that, I mean, we talked about this earlier this morning, rewatching the race, that livened up the grid.
Well, yeah.
That showed excitement. And so while, I'm excited to see the improvements that this debut is going to make, because I will probably say this more than once. I think the grid is stale.
Yeah.
And I just think this was a really, really special moment for Ollie Bearman, who was the driver who came in for Carlos.
Yeah, so Friday morning, Ollie Bearman woke up expecting to race in his F2 race.
He placed pole.
Yeah, he had qualified for pole position for the F2 race, and then he got a call from Fred Vasseur asking to replace Carlos for FP3 quali and the race. And Ollie Bearman had practiced in some of the rookie practice sessions last year for Haas, so he has driven in a F1 car before, but only for like an hour or two. But to get thrown into a Ferrari car on your F1 debut, you've got one practice session and then you have to go into qualifying into one of the most difficult courses in the season is kind of wild. And he's only just now 18, so like a year ago he wouldn't have been able to get thrown into one of these races because you have to be 18 to race in F1. I'm pretty sure.
He's like over 18 and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know about you have to be over 18 to
I was
drive.
seeing something in that about an interview about that.
It might be super license rules. Like, you can't have that levels, like, you can't have it until you're 18.
Yeah. But, like, I know that, like, Max started at, like, 17, so I don't really know how that happened.
Yeah. I mean, I don't actually know enough about the super license to really...
So maybe you don't have to be 18, so scratch that. Anyways, yeah, so he had to go into FP3, and he basically just used that session to get
feel
used
the car. Also, he is not getting Ollie Bearman's own car. He is being placed into Carlos Sainz's Ferrari.
And they have very different body types. So
Ollie is probably up there in height with George Russell and Esteban Ocon, and Carlos Sainz is on the he's not short. Like, he's probably in the middle of the field.
I think that Carlos is probably like 5'8", 5'9", and then Ollie's probably like 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
And throwing them in, and because like the car is fitted for Carlos, and so he doesn't have his own seat, so he has to basically sit in Carlos's seat and figure out a way to get comfortable.
Yeah. So that's really what most of FP3 was, you know, getting in the car, feeling the track in an F1 car. Getting used to the steering wheel, the G's, and yeah, he had an hour to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, and then during FP3, we also saw Zhou crash.
Yeah, so Zhou ended up crashing in FP3 kind of towards, I don't remember when it was.
I think it was towards the end. Yeah. Because then I think there were like 10 minutes left once they got the car off the track. It was a pretty bad crash. It wasn't the worst crash we've ever seen, but it wasn't great.
It was enough damage that...
And he had just clipped the wall, like I said before, with one of those turns, like, because if you're not on the right line, if you accidentally clip the wall, like, ever so slightly, like, you will crash.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened to him. And they had a couple hours between FP3 and qualifying, and all of the commentators were saying that the extra car that teams have as backups, they're allowed to have it a little bit more built up than they were in the past, so that they can move a little bit faster if they have to rebuild the car. Yeah. And the team was actually able to rebuild it.
But we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get to that when we get to qualifying.
Do you have anything else on FP3? Do you want to go over Ollie a little bit?
Yeah, so I just wanted to, because we've discussed the other drivers since Ollie debuted in FP3, I just wanted to quickly kind of talk about who Ollie is and his background, just so that you guys know how he ended up in an F1 car. So Ollie is a British F2 driver currently racing for Prema. He was super successful in his karting years in F4, and then in 2021, he got invited to the Ferrari Driver Academy Scouting World Finals. Ferrari, maybe let's shorten that name. This earned him a spot with the Academy. I think he performed really, really well. So 2022 saw him compete in F3, winning once and taking third overall. 2023 saw Ferrari and Prema move Ollie up to F2, finishing 6th with 4 wins. And then basically Ollie is now doing his F2 season.
Yeah.
And he's one of the reserve drivers, right?
I don't know if he's technically a reserve driver for Ferrari, but now he probably is. Like, even if he doesn't have like a contract saying he's a reserve driver, because of the 4 drivers per season
like the
rule,
same way. Yeah,
he's going to be one of the Ferrari reserve drivers, I'm guessing, because like if Charles or Carlos again get sick, they're gonna want to throw somebody in there, and they only have one other driver that they would be able to throw in until they meet the limit.
Yeah. So at 18, Ollie is the youngest driver ever to race for Ferrari. We've talked about this driver before in our Mexico last season episode, but Ricardo Rodriguez previously held this title, and that was in 1961. He was 19. I think he was like a little less than a year older than Ollie. So that is crazy to know that there has not been someone this young in that car. He's also the first British driver in a Ferrari since Eddie Irvine drove in 1999. And yeah, it's I feel like there was a lot of like really cool little accomplishments that happened this weekend. Not only for Ollie, but for a few other drivers.
Yeah. I would agree.
And for one of the teams. Like, I think that I feel like there was a lot of really important moments that happened this weekend that will be a ripple effect.
Yeah.
And yeah, Ollie Bearman, if you haven't heard the name before, you're gonna freaking hear it now, because when we get to the race, his performance is spectacular for the amount of time, in my opinion, for the amount of time he's had in the car. Yeah. I am so impressed. And I honestly am so excited. Like, it's something, it's fresh, it's refreshing.
Well, yeah, and that's also, like, one last comment on it, that some of these teams, like Ferrari and Red Bull and Mercedes, you don't typically come into your rookie season and get thrown into one of these cars immediately. Like, you don't typically come from F2 and then immediately are thrown into one of, like, the best cars, one of the top teams in the world. And for them to have thrown him in over somebody else is kind of wild. And it was an interesting decision that the commentators were saying that if Fred Vasseur was not the team principal for Ferrari, they don't think that this would have happened.
No. I think, we discussed it last episode. I think Fred is
I think he's making a lot of really good decisions for Ferrari.
Really good decisions. And, I think that Ollie's performance, I think, is making people look closer at the F2 guys and not dismissing them.
Yeah.
Because we've talked about it before. I think so many of them are itching to get into F1, but there's no spots.
Yeah. I think at the end, in our final thoughts, let's go over what we think could happen.
Cool. But yeah, so that is free practice and Ollie Bearman.
Yeah, and we're going to get into qualifying now.
Cool.
Qualifying. So we start off Q1 and Zhou's car still not ready.
We're basically told at this point the commentators are completely under the impression that Zhou is just not going to be qualifying. His mechanics, the footage that was seen, are just his mechanics scrambling.
Yeah.
And then halfway through Q1, he gets in his car.
Yeah.
And he's fully suited up to sit in his car.
Yeah.
And then with, 2 minutes left,
He goes out
and just misses.
I
Like,
know.
if they had finished the car a minute earlier, he
probably would have gotten a lap
in. But, I mean, that was really the biggest thing that happened in qualifying in Q1, because to just understand the undertaking that these mechanics accomplished, I understand Kick Sauber is not a Red Bull, and probably, if you were to sit there and compare and have, the mechanics compete in a time crunch, who knows, but like, kudos to Sauber because, you know, it's a team that I feel like the mechanics don't always get the limelight. Obviously, stronger cars do. And to be able to almost, to miss it by that much, you know, highlights the incredible, like, intelligence and skill that these people have, no matter what team they are.
Yeah. So the people who went out in Q1 were Valtteri Bottas, Esteban Ocon, Pierre Gasly, Logan Sargent, and Zhou Guanyu. Logan. It's been a year. You've done all these tracks now in an F1 car.
I think, you know, unfortunately, I think
patience is wearing thin.
I don't think that my patience is wearing thin because I don't think I've been impatient. I think I'm just at a point where I'm like, this is it. This is the last season we'll ever see. Like, I think if he continues to perform like this and Alex is not performing close to him, you know, if Alex and him stay really close to each other, then it's, you know, it's the car.
Yeah.
But if Alex
I do think the car hasn't suited the two tracks that we've been at so far.
I agree, but I think if Alex outshines and outperforms Logan, you know, that's it. But you know, that's okay. That's okay. Like, it's just, you know, he'll go on to a different type of car.
Yeah.
So I think I'm just kind of indifferent. I hope he can improve, but I'm not going to be surprised if he doesn't.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. I do just want to note that the drivers that were knocked out in the first quali are the same as last week, so it's not the same order, but it is the same exact drivers, so really interesting to kind of see.
Almost a consistency in the one lap pace.
The consistency, but also just kind of really solidifying how Sauber and Alpine just really need to.
But it's interesting because Sauber's race pace is not horrendous.
No, I think that they've had
some bad pit stops.
Some really bad pit stops and some just like real
bad strategy.
Yeah.
But like when they're actually racing, like there was a good amount of the race.
Yeah, I mean, Zhou is doing really well. So,
and I feel like that's been the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, I would be curious to see, you know, if he hadn't had what happened in FP3, I'd be curious to see how he would have performed in this qualifying. So, I'm excited to see Australia.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, then for Q2, we see Ollie Bearman, Alex Albon, Kevin Magnussen, Daniel Ricciardo, and Nico Hülkenberg get out. Nico Hülkenberg's car basically just shut down. The engine stopped working. So he just automatically was not going to move on to Q3 because of that. He has consistently moved on to Q3, I'd say, most races over the last year. But this time, no. It was really funny. He did make a post about how he went camping in the middle of Q2.
Yeah, he just found a folding chair and just sat next to his car.
Yeah.
You know, it happened in a way that he was able to pull off the grid. They didn't have to, you know, it didn't really stop. It was just a reset.
And then Ollie Bearman was only like 0.036 of a second behind Lewis, and Lewis had gone P10 in Q2, so he was moving on. So he had just missed Q3.
Which I think, you know,
is insane.
Is insane that he's 0.036 off of
Lewis Hamilton.
Well,
and there were a lot of people that are like, oh, he's in a Ferrari, he should have moved on to Q3. Bro's been in the car for an hour.
Give the boy a chance.
Yeah.
Like, let him breathe, guys. Like, I want to see you do that.
I know.
Like, come on.
I know.
Ugh.
And then for Q3, why don't you go over it?
Nothing really happened. Honestly, it was fairly clean qualifying. And yeah, like we've seen, the top three has been pretty consistent. So Max ended up taking the fastest time in qualifying, so he'll be sitting pole. Charles Leclerc came in second, with Checo following in third. Alonso in fourth. And there was a moment where we did think that Fernando was going to possibly sit pole. It might have been 15 seconds, but...
And he hasn't sat pole since, like, 2012.
2012.
And so we were very excited.
Oscar Piastri in fifth, Lando Norris in sixth, George Russell in seventh, Lewis Hamilton in eighth, Yuki Tsunoda in ninth, and Lance Stroll in 10th. I will say, I feel like George has been outperforming Lewis the last two races and the last two qualifying.
I think one of the commentators even said this weekend that the car that Mercedes has built this season complements George over Lewis, which I almost expected them to do because I think they're starting to move on. Like, they still want to give Lewis a good chance at winning this year, but I think that they're going to push George more.
Yeah, I mean, understandably.
Yeah.
Understandably with the movement that's happening. But yeah, I feel like George has been just, pretty consistently
And sometimes
performing.
in the past, we would get frustrated with George because it would get... His radios would be a little whiny. But he's been great so far this season. I haven't had any issues with him.
We've talked about it before, since the season started. I think he has stepped up into a leadership role.
Yeah.
I think that you have to when there's transition, and especially with the amount of support staff that there is. These teams, they're such the core of the team. You know, without the you can build a car, but you have to have a driver.
Yeah.
Just really interesting. And then Checo's been surprising. He's been up there, but if he wasn't, be concerning. So
Checo did have a much better race this week, though.
Yeah. So, that was qualifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Think we can get into the actual race.
I think we can. A lot happened.
Yes, a lot happened.
All
we watched it twice.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, let's get into it.
So the first thing we want to talk about is probably the first thing that I think George Russell saw as the lights were going. And it was pretty talked about, but if you happen to miss it, there was a slight jump start from Lando Norris. It literally happened so fast, and almost immediately George called it out on his radio. But I think any of them would, understandably.
Oh, yeah.
It was actually, I think it was by we'll get to it, but it was
took them a while to evaluate it, though.
Yeah, it took him a while to come to terms with whether he would be penalized.
Yeah.
So that was definitely interesting because we have not seen that before, ever.
Yeah.
We've literally for us.
Yeah.
And then in typical fashion, Max almost immediately ends up pulling away. By the second lap, the gap is already over a second, which at this point...
It's expected.
I think, there was an after-race interview where Jack Doohan was like, I don't even think they panned to Max until the 30th lap.
Yeah.
And I'm happy for him, congrats, but it's also, I'm really happy that F1 TV is not really cutting to him.
I know. Because
it's just... There's so much stuff happening on the grid besides him leading. And then what happens to Pierre, Emma?
Oh, yeah, within the first lap or so, he had some gearbox problems, and he had to retire the car almost immediately. Mm-hmm. And so Pierre is just Alpine's having a rough season. Yeah,
Jack Doohan confirmed he is, what is he for Alpine?
He's a reserve
driver.
Yeah.
He does commentary for F1 TV really, really well, to be honest. And he confirmed that they could not get to 6th gear, so they just immediately had to retire.
It's a little concerning that they're already having gearbox problems this early.
On top of everything else, I mean,
know.
It's just, it was, listen, Anthony Joshua, one of the Alpine investors, was there this weekend. He's a heavyweight boxer. He seemed positive, so if they're not losing their shit.
Well, that's what I also think. Alpine was probably straight up with their investors from like the get-go and was like, your money's not going to take effect until next year. Like,
they're also having, in the even 2023 season, they had turnover.
Yeah.
They're still having turnover.
Yeah.
Like, there's still so much happening at Alpine. So then by lap 4, Charles had been holding second, in the first 3 laps, and then by lap 4, Checo ends up passing Charles, and it pretty much stays
like that. Yeah.
In lap 7, Lance Stroll locked up and went into the barrier at turn 23 after he had wall contact, so this resulted in a safety car coming out.
It was actually a funny radio afterwards. His race engineer is like, all right, Lance, can you bring it back? And he's like, no, I'm in the effing wall. Like,
yeah, definitely confused as to how his engineer didn't know
that he had crashed.
Maybe he was looking at the wrong screen or a different set of data, but, yeah. And then at this point, as we've seen,
bunch of people pit.
Like, safety car normally happen, almost everyone pits. Lando, Lewis, Zhou, and Hulk do not pit.
Yeah, the teams where their drivers were really close to each other on the grid, they didn't pit. They only had one driver pit because to double stack them it just wouldn't have worked.
It just puts a lot on the pit crews.
Yeah, there wasn't enough time to even double stack.
So while this is happening, Fernando, there was an incident while the big flurry of people coming in, they're pulling out. Fernando got cut off by Checo in the pit lane.
So Checo got a 5-second penalty, right?
Yeah, so this immediately, Aston Martin raises it to the stewards, and a few laps later, we end up finding out that Checo does, I think it was a 5-second penalty.
Yeah, it was.
At this point, because Lando was one of those 4 drivers that did not pit, Lando was the race leader for a handful,
which had me very excited,
of laps.
But I knew that he was going to keep that. He knew he wasn't going to keep that. He was like, I can drive as long as I can on these tires, but I got Max Verstappen coming at me, so...
Yeah. So by lap 9, the safety car ends. Lando is still leading. And then lap 11 and 12 is when we kind of see the beginning of Kevin Magnussen just being an absolute savage for Nico.
He really was a menace of society.
He really went to war for Nico.
It was so funny. I've always thought, like, why haven't some of the teams on the lower end... Why haven't
they... Play a little dirty.
Yeah, why haven't they just been, like, kind of savage and sacrificed one of the cars... penalty-wise for the other car to, basically defend for the other car, which is essentially what Haas did today.
Yeah, so he ends up cutting into Alex Albon, which results in Albon going off, and I think this was the radio point where Alex was, like, naughty driving, which was just, like, so British. And this resulted in the first 10-second penalty for Kevin Magnussen. Lando's been...
Well, we also... Sorry to interrupt, but the commentators were also trying to figure out, like, normally that would be a 5-second penalty. Why are these 10-second penalties today? Like, what's the difference? What are the stewards deciding on?
It brought up the same conversation that we have, which is the absolute lack of consistency with the penalties.
Yeah.
The absolute just, like, why?
Yeah.
Like, show me the work. So, yeah. By lap 13, we start to really see Lando's tires kind of just give up, and Max is able to move to first. And we also see Checo move to third. I also think at this point, this is when Lando, I think, had to pit, right? Or no? Did he pit yet?
No, Lando went the majority of the race on his mediums, and then pit with, like, 13 laps left for softs.
Yeah. So, lap 14, Ollie Bearman, who had been sitting in 11th, is able to move past Zhou and sit into 10th, which honestly is just exciting in itself that this is his first freaking F1 race. And
he's already making moves.
He's already making moves, and he's in points range.
Yeah.
We also, at this point, are told that Lando's jump start is dismissed. Nothing else is happening, so at this point, it's put to bed.
Apparently, the reason why he's going to get a penalty for it is because his tires didn't actually leave the box that he was starting in, so he was able to get away with it. If your tires leave your box, then that's when you'll get a penalty for it.
Yeah, if you leave the box or if you're still in motion when the light is...
Yeah, and he had braked.
He had braked.
Yeah.
Lap 16, we see Checo get that 5-second penalty for that unsafe release with Fernando. And then in lap 21, Ollie makes another move and passes Hulk, moving up to 9th, which is just like...
And he was even beating himself up afterwards. He was like, it took me too long to pass Hulk.
It took him too long, yeah.
And it was like, bro...
It's like, man, sometimes the McLarens just sit there for laps.
Yeah, as much as I'm a Lando fan, sometimes he really just...
You move faster than them
He takes a long time to make a move.
Lap 23, K-Mag leaves the track, gaining on Yuki, and that's when we see him get his second 10-second penalty. Yeah, he just starts to, like... He just gives no shits. Like,
we were talking about this, that it almost seems like the younger drivers have been drilled, like safety has been
understandably,
drilled. Yes.
And respectfully, understandably
yes,
why.
100%. But the concept of defensive driving is so different now than what it was 10 years ago when K-Mag started in F1. And we wonder that, like, because you can tell the aggressive defensive driving, it's from the drivers like K-Mag when he wants to be a menace, like Fernando most of the time. Like, it's very different where, like, Lando and Oscar, they'll defend, but then if they know that it's not worth it, they will just let the person go. Where K-Mag was like, nope, you're not passing.
Well, I wonder, too, from a strategy standpoint, if it's not even just the drivers and the drilling of safety that they've grown up in and the differences. But also strategy. I mean, tire deg and tire strategy has become
and
so pivotal. Cost cap, but like tire deg, tire strategy is so pivotal that, you know, defending really, really works the tires.
Oh, 100%.
So that is another thing, you know, most teams will be like, don't, because we'll have to pit, you know, is defending worth that pit stop time?
Yeah.
But then, cost caps completely change the game.
Yeah, because if you get into an accident while you're defending, then...
Yeah, so I wonder
you're either out of the race or it's just like another nose that they have to throw into the car, which is more money.
You know, and depending on certain parts, you know, penalties.
Yeah.
Massive penalties. So, definitely interesting to see how the regulations, I feel like, have evolved, even strategy and the kind defending.
Of racing that you're doing. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Lap 26.
By lap 26, we see a holdup by K-Mag. K-Mag at this point has 20 seconds, and I think
between him and Nico, who was in front of him.
Yeah. No, he had 20 seconds of penalties, so he was trying to...
We also don't know if his race engineer had told him he had that penalties yet, and so we don't know if he was just like, full send, I'm going to get the points.
Yeah. But essentially, he started to cause a holdup and create this kind of DRS block train.
With the rest of the grid.
That consisted of Yuki, Esteban, Alex, and Logan. And eventually Bottas was able to catch up. That is how much Kevin Magnussen was slowing them down. And we believe that the strategy was essentially he was holding everyone up to give Nico that time to pit so that Nico could eventually do a pit stop and then stay in 10th. You know, or at this point,
is eventually 11th. What he did. Eventually, Nico, when he did pit, he comes out with still a couple of seconds between him and K-Mag, so he didn't lose the spot at all.
Yeah. We saw Yuki try to make a move on Kevin Magnussen, and he was unsuccessful.
And Yuki was not happy about it.
And he was not happy. And, you know, honestly, every time we heard the race engineer's radio from Haas, they seem to be in full support.
They were like, great job.
They were like, you're doing brilliant. Like, and honestly, it was so, I mean, it was
fun to watch.
And they were so focused because it was the back of the group was so clumped up.
Yeah.
You know, it was so interesting to watch.
Because it's also the kind of racing that you want to, like, that's exciting to watch when they're so close together, when they're almost stuck in that DRS train, because it's like, who's going to break it off? Who's going to be the one to
make the move?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when Yuki made that move and Kevin kept Yuki behind him, Ocon was able to move up on Yuki, and then eventually on lap 33, Alex full sends and is able to just pass Yuki, moving up to 14th. So this is kind of, we start to see this, just like Kevin is just sitting there, no one's able to move. You can see the frustration. Further up on the grid, Oscar's been stuck behind Lewis. He's been in DRS range, but he just has not moved. And then we finally see Hulk pit, and their strategy works flawlessly.
Yeah, it was perfect.
He comes out with over 2 seconds ahead of Kevin Magnussen, and it is exactly what they need. It was just so impressive.
It was.
It was so impressive. So yeah, Oscar at one point attempts to pass Lewis, but we see a walk-up happen, so he pulls back. And then lap 37, Hamilton pits, and Oscar's able to move up to 5th. And Hamilton puts on the softs, you know, it's lap 37.
Hamilton, I think, was running the same strategy as Lando.
Yeah. At lap 37, we also see Alonso kiss the wall at turn 9. No real damage, no need to do anything. He just
had a radio message. Which his radio messages are some of my favorite, honestly. They're so funny.
They're so random.
And they're so funny.
They're so clear. Like, he says so many words. Lap 38, Lando has a not so great pit, a 4.1 second pit. He puts on the softs and does come out ahead of Mercedes. So Lando is right ahead of Lewis.
Yeah.
And Ollie is in 7th. Ollie is
was just cruising.
Ollie is ahead of Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris.
Yeah.
Like,
and Lando
crazy.
And Lewis were so close to each other when they came out of the pit, so Ollie kept asking his race engineer, like, how far are they, like, how much more do I need to push?
Especially because they had put on the softs.
Yeah, and I don't think the softs were working as much as they had hoped. At the same time, I don't think if they had to battle each other, they would have been as slow as they are. I think that them battling each other definitely slowed them down. I think if they didn't have to, they probably would have caught up to Ollie.
Yeah. And that was the thing, too, because we do see at this point Lando at lap 41 get noted for weaving on the track. You know, that's cutting into that time.
It was so obvious, too. It was like, bro, if you want to be sneaky about it, go for it, but, like, you just made it so obvious.
Yeah. So he gets that noted, and then lap 42, he gets a black and white flag. And so for those that don't know, black and white flag is essentially like the final warning, like knock it off or else you're going to get a penalty. So Lando does knock it off at this point and stops weaving.
There was also, at this point, there was a lot of really weird radio issues. Like, Lando at one point came in on, like, K-Mag's radio.
And I don't know if that was, if the drivers were dealing with that, or if it was just the way it was feeding into, like, what we were hearing.
In F1 TV.
But yeah.
Maybe. It was very strange, though. It was like, imagine being K-Mag's race engineer, and then Lando responds.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope it was not happening on their end, because that would be horrible.
Yeah, I agree.
Lap 43 is confusing, because Zhou pits, and everywhere...
Zhou's been doing really well. He was in, like, 10th at this point.
Everywhere I had seen... And now, we knew he was going to drop back when he pitted.
But not so much.
But not to dead last, because I don't know if, like, Sauber just... Something is wrong with their pit stops, but it was long. And And I can't find the time. Nothing has noted how long it was.
And last week we saw Bottas have that 54-second pit stop.
Crazy.
And this time, Zhou, based on the time gaps between him and everybody else, I don't think that he should have fallen back as much as he did. If the pit stop had gone smoothly. I think if it had been a normal 2-3 second pit stop, he would have come out somewhere around 14th.
Yeah, it looked like it was another wheel issue. I don't know. It's definitely really concerning from Sauber's standpoint, and from the pit crew standpoint, what's going on? What's happening that this has affected this? Yeah. And affected it badly twice. Yeah. So yeah, just confusing. And with Zhou dropping, Hulk is able to move into 10th. Yeah. So Haas freaking succeeded. Like Emma said, around this time we're hearing concern from Ollie about Lando and Lewis behind him, as I think any of us being in an F1 car with Lando and Lewis behind us would be. And the commentators at this point actually did say that Ollie... And this is impressive in its own. Lap 45 was, at that point, when he did lap 45, it was his best lap of the race.
Yeah, that's also the wild thing.
The improvement.
When he was asking, how far back they were, he was able to actually speed up.
Yeah, he increased, he improved his time by, half a second.
Yeah, which is insane.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Which means he was very good at working with the tires then.
Yeah, I mean, just impressed through and through. Yeah. The ability to have the awareness of the focus of driving, but also, okay, I need to think about the guys that are a few seconds behind me. They're not on my ass, but I need to think, what can I do? And I'm sure most of them, we don't hear enough of it. We haven't listened to their radio for an entire race. I'm sure most of them have these conversations. But it was cool to hear, First time ever. And then finally, on lap 49, the last kind of incident of note was Danny Ricciardo spins out at turn 1. It
was strange.
Did he have a lock? I don't know if it was a lockup or what, but it was he spun. Yeah. He lost control. And he did stay ahead of the Saubers, but he dropped farther back. And then the race ended with Max finishing first.
Shocker.
So, yeah.
That was the race.
That was the race. I mean...
The race was Max, then Checo, then Charles.
Yeah, so the results, Max came in pole. He finished this race in 1 hour and 20 minutes. Checo finished in second, 13.6 seconds behind his teammate.
I mean, it's better than it was last week.
Yeah, I mean, it's an improvement, but, that...
Yeah.
Anyways, Charles Leclerc ended up in 3rd with Oscar Piastri in 4th, Fernando Alonso in 5th, George Russell in 6th, Ollie Bearman, F1 debut, finishing in 7th, Lando Norris in 8th, Lewis Hamilton in 9th, Nico Hülkenberg in 10th. So that is the top 10. We saw Lance Stroll and Pierre Gasly DNF, and Carlos was medically exempted from this race.
Yeah.
So, yeah, pretty crazy. Another kind of crazy thing to hear is that now in the point standing, Ollie Bearman is 10th in F1. In F1 standings. So, definitely really kind of cool to see.
Yeah, he's higher in the F1 standings than he is in the F2 standings, which is pretty funny.
Yeah, the other kind of cool little tidbits they were saying at the end of the race was this is the first time 4 Brits have scored points in an F1 race since 1968. And the last time 4 Brits ended in the top 10 was in Japan 2000. Yeah. And I believe at that point, not all the top 10 was scoring points.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, we saw Haas enter the Constructors with 1 point. McLaren and Mercedes are now 2 points apart, so I think that's going to be probably the closest fight throughout the whole season will end up being McLaren and Mercedes.
Yeah.
But
I think everything else, let's finish up on our final thoughts.
Yeah.
So our final thoughts for this race weekend, I think ours are very similar. I think a lot of people were saying that Ollie getting 7th is expected, which I do think the car that he's in, it's pretty expected for it to be in the top 10 just because it is the second best car on the grid right now. But I think it's not like it was handed to him. It was not an easy race. I think he did a fantastic job. And because of him doing a fantastic job, I think is going to change things up for next year. Like Mary Catherine said, the grid feels stale. And sometimes, I think there's a lot of the younger F2 drivers and drivers that are no longer even in F2 and they're just waiting for a spot in F1 or another series. They all deserve a shot at least. And I think some of the older drivers, I don't want to sound ageist in a way, but I almost think it's time for the changing of the guards. It's time to try something new. And to give the younger guys a chance because there's only 20 spots, and if you've had 8+ years in F1 and now you're just not performing the way that you used to, you're not in a great car, maybe it's time to give up on the dream.
I mean, listen, there's been, in all of F1, from the public, the most public people we see, there's been a lot of turnover in a lot of teams.
Yeah.
Williams, we see new leadership. Ferrari, we have new leadership. Alpine has new leadership. Who else? There's a lot of change, and so I think we're seeing a change on the top end of who is in charge and new perspectives. And I also think, we said, I think Logan Sargent's kind of the perfect example.
You give 2 years.
I think a 2-year try is probably the perfect amount of time. Rookie seasons are hard. It's the first time it's the first time they're in these cars. It's the first time they're in these cars on these circuits. And for some, it's the first time they're on these, they haven't been to some of these circuits.
Yeah.
And I feel like you have someone like Nick DeVries where they're only given, a handful of races, half a season, where it's who knows if they should have kept him for longer. But I feel like with Ollie Bearman, everything they're saying about Ollie is very similar to what we said about Liam last season. And I just feel like, why was no one talking about Liam?
Yeah.
And obviously, they're not going to because it's Ollie's weekend, but I think it just shows you that we had this, wow, they should be in F1. They're so amazing. And then they don't get put in F1.
And it's exciting seeing a new name.
And
seeing what they can do.
The skill is, and that's the thing, seeing what they can do, seeing the new perspective. So, I hope that for some of the F2 guys that have been wanting to be in F1, I hope that this opens some of, recruiters' eyes. I hope that this opens conversations to some of these kids, and I also hope that some of the older guys, maybe realize, hey,
I'm not the driver I used to be.
Or,
the regulation changes. These aren't the cars that I grew up driving. These aren't the cars that, I started off driving. It's so different now, the cars. So, I don't know if... listen,
I get it that the grid is not going to change massively every season. I'm not saying that I expect that. I think the fact that there are no rookies, and it's something that a lot of people are talking about, that there's no one new, and that's okay, but I think we are going to get new drivers next year.
I think I wouldn't be surprised if Nico Hülkenberg and K-Mag, if this is their last season, oh my gosh, excuse me, if this is their last season, just completely. And I think when it comes to Daniel Ricciardo, I don't think he's the driver that he used to be. At least the performance that he gave in last season and what he's done so far, I just don't know if he's the confident driver he used to be.
I don't know if we can really look at last season. Last season was honestly a mess. Yeah. Like, I don't think we can look at last season, but so far, based off of the performance of the last 2 races...
Yuki has outperformed him.
Yuki's outperformed him, and he just seems to be struggling. Maybe he needs to find his groove. I don't know, but I just... It's moments like this where it has to be a business decision. You know, business is hard, and I understand that these drivers... I also think it goes to show that, like, a lot of times we forget that F1 is a completely different sport. That the media presence, the personality...
It's different than what it used to be.
The marketing is so different that, you know... Yeah, they might not be the best driver, but they are so sellable.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that I wonder if that is why the F1 recruiting has evolved as well.
Well, I think also a lot of these teams have built their social media presence off of the
quirkiness and
their
the
specific
drivers.
And so the thought of having a new driver and getting rid of one of the older ones, I think that I almost worry that some of these teams are... like, concerned, like, oh, are people not going to follow us anymore because of this?
Well,
but
I also think the problem is, too, can be us, the spectators.
Yeah.
You know, people get ride or die for these athletes, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, but if you're not...
You have to come to a point where you're like, okay, I love this driver. They've had a fantastic career, but they're not who they used to be. They're not performing at the level they used to.
And that's okay. I mean, it
happens in every sport.
It happens in every sport. I just think the problem is that F1 is such an... It is such a sell yourself sport. Yeah. Like, you have to sell yourself. You have to come in with sponsorships. You have to come in with the fans. You have to come in with the following. That I think for some of the drivers, it's probably really hard for their teams to separate, you know, their driver skill and their marketability.
Yeah. But I feel like it's almost, right now, the F1 grid is the equivalent of, I can't remember if it was the 2014 or 2018 Men's World Cup, the Spanish team, where it's all the older guys and they haven't retired yet.
It was the 2018.
Yeah. And then they weren't doing as well as they used to, and everyone had caught on to their way of playing and were copying it and doing better than they were.
Yeah, it was like the last, I believe it was 2018, it was the last, like, big group of guys that won the World Cup.
And then we get to the next World Cup, whether it was the 2018 or the 2022 one.
And it was all new kids.
It was all new kids. It was like a very young team, and they were playing really well, and they were using different strategies while also using the old one. They were still doing something a little bit different that was helping them, that I think is probably going to help them in the next World Cup. But, like, I almost feel like we're in that stage right now with the F1 grid where, like, they just need someone to take a chance on the younger drivers.
I think it's a changing of the guard. And
it happens.
I wouldn't be surprised if this is a cycle that we see throughout our years watching.
Yeah. I'm very interested to see how silly's season is. I think I could see Ollie Bearman driving for Haas next year.
I'm curious to see if anyone retires. That's what I'm curious to see.
I think Fernando, the fact that he's mentioned it now both race weekends, that he doesn't know if he's going to continue next year. I know Fernando loves driving, but I just don't know. It's weird for him to have mentioned it twice now. Yeah. And they always talk about how old he is. Bottas, I don't know if he's going to continue. I think he's had a rough time.
Since he left Mercedes.
It's been rough. Great, yeah. And I think he has so many other things going on. I wouldn't be surprised. We've talked about Checo, that we just don't think that they're going to renew his contract. And
I don't know where he would end up. Yeah. Where he would want to go at that point.
Yeah, at that point. And so we don't know.
There's just so much movement, and it's going to be crazy, especially with the fact that I think F2 is really being looked at right now.
Yeah.
Like, I think Ollie kind of gave people this taste. And you know what? Kudos to him. You know, he wasn't pole position. Yeah, he wasn't right next to Charles, but, you know, he really, it was such a shining weekend. And it was, I don't know, it was just such a it was so cool to witness,
Yeah,
you know,
I agree.
something really special, and something happened so successfully, that he didn't crash, that it wasn't this horrible experience, you know, that it was so wonderful for him, so joyous for him. And then, the only other thing I wanted to mention that was, that I forgot that was stated this weekend, was Red Bull moved past Williams to be 4th place in victory wins overall in F1 history this weekend. Which is wild. So, they officially passed Williams.
Well, who's ahead of them? I'm guessing Ferrari, McLaren, and Mercedes?
Maybe, I don't know, I didn't look up.
I think that's probably it. That makes the most sense to me.
Let's go with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Because Mercedes won all of those.
Mm-hmm. All those years
with Lewis. That's 7 years of Lewis.
Yeah.
So.
But so a lot of history this weekend. You know, a lot. But, we have a weekend off.
Yeah, so next weekend we'll record our next episode for a Get Ready With Us episode, and I think it would also be fun if we talk about the F1 Academy race during that episode.
Yeah.
So we'll make sure to do a debrief on that, so keep an eye out for that. Yeah.
Yeah, we will be in Australia in 2 weeks, not us personally, but the entire F1 Academy. We will be watching from our couch. But the next race is in Australia. This is a crazy circuit. Yeah. A lot has happened at this circuit.
It's a good one, too.
It's a good one. I'm excited. This will be a lot of home racing for some drivers.
Yeah.
We didn't watch last year.
No.
So I'm excited to watch this for the first time.
Yeah, I think it'll be good.
Yeah, so.
All right.
That's it.
Bye, guys.
Bye.